Welcome today to the Lance Wallnau Show. This is going to be a very special episode because I'm going to be focusing on a really cool interview that Netanyahu just did with Dr. Phil and some other current events that are taking place. And I really believe the more truth and information you're armed with, the more powerful you become. You're going to get some eye-opening insight as to what's really happening with Israel and the Gaza-Hamas battle right now. And it's going to become for you, I believe, a confidence builder because God is at work with the truth, even in the midst of a swirl of lies. And I think America is being poised to have an alarm attack, almost like, hey, what's going on here? And it's going to result in a pushback against the chaos that is taking place in this current administration and from Ukraine to the Middle East. I think the American people are anxious about what's happening, which leads to something else. Strange things are going on. I'm not a financial expert or advisor, but I'm going to tell you what I've observed. Interest rates just went up again. The economy is in trouble. You've got this $35 trillion debt eventually coming home to roost. You've got other countries trying to decouple from the dollar. And while that's happening, you're seeing gold go up and up and up. And I've told you about this for a while. But then I started looking at one article which really concerned me. What if they come up with a conviction of Trump in New York? He already lost 2 cases. He's on a 3rd case right now. What if they succeed in that? How will that affect the markets? Well, one very credible statistician said he believed that you're going to see treasury bills, short-term treasury bills. You're going to see confidence in the economy tank. If we can't trust that the government isn't going to try to jail its political enemies, shakeup is going to happen in the marketplace. And it's going to be I think it's going to be a flood of capital into the gold and alternative currencies because the dollar is going to be in trouble. Once again, go to lancewallnau.com/gold. You need to be looking at parking yourself in a place which is fireproof right now. Take your retirement, your IRA, like many people are doing, put it into gold because the value of gold is going up as the American economy shakes and as we have uncertainty about the future of justice in America. It's producing marketplace consequences. And I believe it's going to be a movement towards pulling back from risk and putting money into gold. Now's the time to be able to make that. If you haven't done it yet, you need to be looking at it now. Go get my free report, lancewallnau.com/gold. You'll be so glad you did because knowledge is power. My people perish for lack of knowledge. You're getting that knowledge now. I want to be able to focus a little bit on what you need to know regarding the spiritual battle that's going on the earth right now. Jesus said to his disciples, his followers, he said that you shall be hated of all men, referring to a period of time when there would be global animus or persecution. And he's talking to his Jewish followers who are the followers of Yeshua, the movement which will become Christianity. And I believe that when Jesus says that, he's speaking about a global period where the hostility of nations is going to be orchestrated by Satan in a way that is going to be an inexplicable rise of anti-Semitism. You would think after what the Jewish people have gone through in the Holocaust, and it was just our parents' generation where they saw that there would be a kind of a sympathy for the plight of Jews needing a homeland where they could exist, some slender piece of real estate they could flee to, where they could have a right to practice their religion and have freedom, and that the world would let them have peace. But there's a spirit that hates the Jewish people, just as the spirit will hate the Christian. It's the reason why it's anti-Christ in the Bible and not anti-Semitic is because, and the ultimate crosshairs of this spirit, it's going to be anyone who is aligned with God is going to be the adversary of the system. Marxism is especially dangerous in its takeover of, to a great extent, Israel politics and culture. When the government owns and controls everything, you run into an apparatus where, just like in the United States, you could suddenly, because of the vast Leviathan-like capabilities of government, it can shut down your bank account. It can take over your property. It could prosecute you with the billion-dollar machinery of lawyers that are coming after you. And with AI added to it, it can then go over everything you've ever said, everything you've ever posted, everything you've ever done to retroactively even go after you to say that you're part of an insurrectionist or a conspiracy group or a people that are, hate speech oriented. And you're seeing that strangely popping up in places like Canada. And you're seeing that kind of draconian philosophy in Australia during COVID. Places that were once strongholds of democracy are crumbling under the weight of this Marxist takeover. And to a great degree, 80% of the people living in these countries assume that their countries are still free. They don't realize the takeover has already started. And I had Rafael Cruz on for a show earlier today. It's Ted Cruz's father. Came from Cuba, was part of the Castro early phase of romanticizing about communism, and then came to the cold realization that communism is death, and it certainly is death to Christianity, because the essence of totalitarian, communist, Marxist government is God. It's the ultimate authority. It cannot tolerate the competition of something higher than it, certainly not God. So it eliminates God, so it has no competition. And that's why anything that is a religious movement has that potential danger, with the exception of Islam, which is an ideology of religion as the outer shell of a political movement on the inside. It has synthesized its politics with its religion as a form of philosophy for global conquest. And so it skirts around that division of church and state and becomes a church face with a state sword working behind it. So, and I don't think you guys don't understand this, but I think you need to be able to see prophetically what's happening right now. The United States has, as you'll hear in a second, 80% of the United States is still sympathetic with Israel, but the university systems and the anarchists that control the apparatus, the street soldiers that are aligned with the Democratic Party, they themselves have taken over the faculty in the universities. That's the Marxist faculties that are sympathetic to this narrative of oppressor and oppressed. And so they can manipulate that to make any people group, even if they're criminal, appear to be the oppressed class. And then, of course, the police and the law-abiding are the oppressors. You say that's bizarre, that's weird. Well, welcome to the incongruence of Marxist ideology. That's where defund the police comes from. Until, of course, the criminals hit the 80% that have a wake-up call and realize this is crazy, and that they force a change in their own government locally. We're watching this phenomena playing out in the Gaza situation. Remember, well, actually, I won't repeat what you're about to hear. I want you to catch it yourself. Let's go to cut number 7 with Dr. Phil with Netanyahu asking about what's the difference between Hamas and the Palestinians, because they're two different groups. You have Hamas as the radical political military party, and then the Palestinians are the people that are embedded there. But let's play cut 7, and I want you to hear this.
This war is between Israel, the Jewish homeland, and Hamas, a terrorist group that has taken over the territory known as the Gaza Strip, which Israel gave up in a goodwill effort for peace in 2005. Occupied by Palestinians, many of whom willingly harbor the terrorists or are at least sympathizers. Are the Palestinian people at large complicit in this? How do you tell the difference between Hamas and Palestinians in the Gaza Strip? Because Hamas doesn't wear a uniform. They hide among the civilians. They hide in schools. They hide in churches. They wear civilian clothes, which is a violation of the Geneva Convention. Are Palestinians complicit in this, or are they just hiding among them? I know they're doing that, but are Palestinians, some, complicit in this?
You have actually both conditions, because we went into buildings, residential buildings, where these terrorists, hide, and where they shoot from. They go to hospitals, schools, residential areas. But when we went into these residential areas, we found tablets, and in the tablet you have, you open the tablet and you see a picture of Adolf Hitler. And then in another building, you see a picture. In another apartment, you see text of Hitler's Mein Kampf, which is the, sort of the work that itemized and planned, laid the plan for the destruction of the 6 million Jews in the Holocaust.
So this in part tells you that there's an ideology that links the same principality, the Prince of Persia, that went after Esther and went after the Jews to commit genocide of the Jewish people in Persia in the Bible, in the period of the books of Esther and the story of Mordecai. That same spirit is rising up in the earth today. It's not wearing a swastika, but the ideology has found its home in the anti-Semitic Islamic community and the Marxist intellectual community on the campuses and the thought leaders that represent the 20% influence factor that is affecting the rest of the culture. But the part that I want you to think about is that isn't covered here is I've looked at the curriculum that is in the schools, which is that shows that the Jew is the enemy. The Jew must be killed. The Jew is our enemy and must be destroyed. So the same way in which Germany would create this hostility towards the Jewish population so that they could justify their extermination exists in the school curriculum. So if you're raised as a Palestinian, it explains why some 80% of Palestinian refugees actually support the Hamas crusade against the Jews, because they've been taught that the Jews are their sworn enemy and the source of their misery. The reality is the billions of dollars that have been sent into Gaza since 2005, which was Israel's saying, here, take this land here and prosper and build something that we can have a community where we can relate to each other. They took the money when Hamas became the political party in power, and they built 300 miles of underground tunnels. They put their money into infrastructure so that they could be militarily engaged. And then our Obama and Biden administration, in some weird psychoses, thinking that they could win over Iran to becoming friends, they released billions of dollars to them in frozen assets that the West had at a time when Trump said Iran would have actually come to the table and negotiated for peace if he had been reelected. And I think Trump was right. They're at the precipice of economic collapse. But the billions of dollars infused ended up going into Hamas, into Hezbollah, and into the Iranian Guard so that they could continue their proxy wars with the Houthis, etc. And there's a whole map of Iran, the Prince of Persia. Again, maybe modern Iran is Persia of old, and that's the area of the principality that once existed over Germany and over the persecution of the Jews at the time of Esther. It's having its resurgence now in an odd way. But because I only have a minute or so to go here, why don't you play the 15-second segment? Because the White House then has to make a very important statement. They have to say, well, is this genocide? Because genocide is if Israel was to take its bombing capacity and wipe out Gaza, or just take out whole sections of Gaza, indiscriminately killing citizens, civilians, and Hamas because they're all embedded. And they're not. They're suffering high levels of casualties because they're separating 16,000 civilians that are embedded with 14,000 Hamas and trying to pick where's the Hamas soldier in the midst of the citizens. In the process of doing it, you have civilian casualties because Hamas embeds themselves with civilians and uses them as shields. So, but the White House, nevertheless, has to make its policy statement carefully because it doesn't want to alienate its Jewish donors from the party base. So go ahead and watch this.
4, we believe Israel can and must do more to ensure the protection and well-being of innocent civilians. We do not believe what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. We have been firmly on record rejecting that proposition.
Firmly on record rejecting genocide. It's an important policy distinction. And thank God we have that. Because if we didn't have that, then you would have a whole different framing of the event. But this idea of doing more, and then the United States withholds the weapons, even though it's been approved by Congress. They're not willing to give to Israel the weaponry they need to mount that kind of sophisticated campaign to avoid civilian casualty. There's the hypocrisy. That's the stupidity of politics. They're trying to win over Arab votes in Michigan, for instance, at the expense of Israel being able to avoid civilian casualties. Figure that one out. We'll be right back. Hey, let's take a moment right here and talk about something. You know, these programs are actually paid for by sponsors. And so the one thing that I always do is try to pick the sponsors that have the greatest value. Those are the ones that I myself believe in. Now, the Birch Gold Group is one of those key sponsors, and I'll tell you why. The economy is the area that I'm the most concerned about in terms of instability in the future. Do you know that right now, China and Russia and India is meeting with Saudi Arabians and South Africans to create an alternative economy, to basically crush the dollar? This is going to have a massive effect on the stock market, on real estate. It'll be a real shaking. But you don't have to be shaken, because there's a way you can protect your retirement, your 401ks, your IRAs, by connecting them in with gold. Gold is unique in history in that it's a place of stored value. In fact, those BRICS nations of Brazil and Russia, India and China, they're going to be backing themselves with, guess what? Gold. So be smart. I want you to go to lancewallnau.com/Birch and get a free information kit. Get knowledge, act quickly, don't wait. And they're going to be able to help you make a great decision on what to do. Remember, that information is free with no strings attached. Do it now, lancewallnau.com/Birch. But this situation, we have to understand it. We have to understand it because the college students obviously are brainwashed. They can't think in terms of arithmetic and understand that we have fewer casualties with Israel trying to cherry pick where Hamas is embedded in civilian clothes amongst the civilians. And when we went in to Mosul, and I think we killed like some 11,000 civilians in order to get to 4,000 ISIS. Israel's doing a much better job than us, and there was no hue and cry going on about civilian casualties in the West because it wasn't anti-Semitic. Now you have something else working. Play cut 8 on this interview with Dr. Phil and Minister Netanyahu.
What is this monstrosity? And they're proud of it. I think that the interesting question I'd ask Dr. Phil is, where are all the women's organizations? Where are they? Why don't they speak up? How could they face this brutality and just be quiet and maybe issue a perfunctory statement when they're forced to? But this is, the whole attitude to Israel here is absurd, because yes, we've killed about 14,000 terrorists. Unfortunately, because of the fact that they use the human shield, there are a slightly bigger number, about 16,000 civilians that were killed in the places where the terrorists won't let them leave. Hamas stops them at gunpoint, because for us, every civilian is a tragedy. Every civilian death is a tragedy. For them, every civilian death is a strategy.
Every civilian death with them is a strategy. So the education I want you to have on this subject, and of course this is being seen in Israel, and you folks understand this, but what I don't think we get in the West is that the Hamas attack on innocent people, the beheading of babies, the raping and the captivity of women. No, what Netanyahu is saying is, where's the women's protest over this? My gosh, I still am waiting to see, when does the media say, why is Biden negotiating while Hamas has 5 American hostages? We didn't know if they're alive still. Can you imagine Trump negotiating with Hamas with 5 Americans and 100 other nations, and mostly Jews, that are still being raped and held hostage? I think the prerequisite to having a conversation is release all the hostages, or we're going to ramp this thing up and deal with this. As Trump said, you got to deal with this quickly, because time isn't on your side. In his wisdom, Trump knew this will play to the radical left, as you're seeing on the college campuses. But regarding the campus protests, play this final cut with Netanyahu, and I want to summarize this.
When you look at the numbers, around us, in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq. Millions of people were killed, Muslims. Millions were uprooted from their homes. Where were the protests? Where are the demonstrations on U.S. campuses? Where is it? And the answer is, it's nowhere, because it's not directed at what we do. It's directed at who we are. It's an anti-Semitic explosion that threatens all of civilization.
And why is that, in your opinion? It's anti-Semitic activity has gone up 360% in America since October 7th, and it was already high before October 7th, and it's gone up 360%. Why? How do you...
Because I think it's a fusion of radical Islam and the ultra-anarchist left. It's fusing together. The only thing they agree on is that Israel has to be destroyed and America has to be destroyed. And that I think is something that, you're right, is rejected by the mainstream Americans. By the way, the polls bear you out. I mean, I see this tracking poll by the Harvard-Harris tracking group, polling group, and they show this. And they show 80% of Americans, when you ask them, do you favor in this conflict Israel or Hamas, 80% say Israel, 20% say Hamas. It hasn't budged by a percent. It's just steady.
Hasn't budged by a percent. So let's process everything we've been hearing so far. Israel gave the land over in the Gaza Strip in 2005 in the hopes for peace. But the wealth that was given by the world to the leaders in Hamas went into indoctrinating the population and building a military infrastructure of tunnels. This is really bizarre. And why would they want the well-being and the prosperity of the Palestinian people? They wouldn't want that, because all that money goes to them. I mean, that money is like in the pockets. You see, you've got these multimillionaires in Qatar who are actually the real corporate leaders of the Hamas funding. And it's so strange. They're living in luxury suites and hotels in Qatar. And the U.S. State Department, by the way, is having Qatar facilitate whatever peace talks and intermediate dialogue we have with Hamas. Figure that out. Who is holding American hostages? The Bible says in Isaiah, in the last days, darkness is on the earth and gross darkness on the people. The gross darkness has to do with the cloud that is on the minds of people. It has to do with the clouding of judgment. And so the only answer to that is if you have truth that is being proclaimed. And the Apostle Paul put it this way. He said, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down arguments, ideas, and imaginations that militate against the knowledge of God. And we see that it can be done. Just while I'm focusing here on Israel, you see the tension there, because we have an increasing immigration in the United States of Arab nations, of Muslim nations that are actually coming in through our border, so that you see the intensified destabilization on the college campuses. Whenever I hear Biden talk about the anti-Semitism and Islam, behavior, it's almost like when they talk about the LGBTQ. It doesn't exist in the West. In the West, there's a celebration of the kid who is, Palestinian sympathetic, or the Arab student. There's a persecution now and a mark, like a star on the Jewish students. So you don't have this equal thing going on of intolerance on both sides. You have it extremely against the Jew and against the Christian and against the conservatives in America, who are persecuted in increasing frustration on the left, because they cannot have coexistence. They can't live peaceably together. But there's good news. I'm going to throw you a curveball here, because other parts of the world, from Hungary to Argentina to El Salvador, where Christianity is embraced in the democracy and bold leaders rise up. Like, take a look at this one asset. We've got bring up the Javier Milei. This guy took on in Argentina, became president, took on the Marxist regime, and he literally used a buzzsaw on his campaign trail to say it was going to cut out the waste. And because he took apart all the government-funded departments like Washington has, the billions and literally trillions of dollars of the pipeline to NGOs and to woke ideologies, including the campus Marxist system, Javier has already seen inflation down from 300% to 11%. His first quarterly budget surplus since 2008. They never had it. Now they actually got positive cash flow. The Argentine peso is the world's best performing currency. El Salvador, same thing, where you have a defender of Christian worldview going in against the compromise and corruption and money grifting of the Marxist corrupt regime in El Salvador. He locked up all of MS-13. He used the military and deployed it and took the gangs out. And once he took the gangs out, the crime stopped. Once the crime stopped, investments started flowing in. The country's having a renaissance. Then the president of El Salvador just did a live broadcast last week that freaked out his cabinet. He said, I'm appointing this attorney general to investigate all of you because I don't want to be the only guy who's not corrupt here. What good is it for me to be an uncorruptible president and you guys are all corrupt? He's going to investigate your past and your future. So from now on, you're on notice. Corruption doesn't exist in my government. I hate to say it, but these kinds of strong leaders are emerging in the earth right now because it's an answer to Psalm 2, where Jesus was promised nations for his inheritance. And I believe we're learning now. There are nations rising, there are nations falling, and we're understanding what the issue is. Well, that's the optimistic end. It's prophetic convergence happening right now. The Bible and end times events are colliding together, and you and I have a front row seat. Look forward to seeing you again on our next broadcast.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world.